Hello guys, BN146 here. Welcome to today's video. So the Ghana National Championships are an annual tournament that are played to determine the national champion. Now they're usually played over two phases, at least for the past few years. So the first part of phase is a 9-round Swiss tournament. This one is open, and the point is to determine the top 5 players. These top 5 players will qualify to play in phase 2, where they'll be added up with the top 5 players in the country by FIDE rating. And those 10 players at the end, they will play a final round robin to determine the national champion and also the national team in Olympiad years. Now, this whole group of tournaments started last weekend with the phase 1, an open nine-round Swiss tournament that was played at the Accra Sports Stadium. It was a very, very interesting tournament, very tantalizing. This is a list of the participants. You can see we had representation from all over the country. We had many young starting up chess players showing up. We had many of our experienced veterans showing up. It was a very, very strong field. And yeah, the tournament definitely didn't disappoint. You had many very interesting games. Too many that we can show. So we'll take a look at a couple of them, couple of moments, and then we'll summarize the whole tournament at the end with some thoughts. So we'll start with this first game. We are looking at it from the side of Mr. Bernard Anshe, goes by Nyamibo on Chess and our co-streamer on this channel. So he had a very fine tournament. He came in as a top seed, and this game is taken from, I believe, round 3. He had already won his first 2 games and was looking to be quite in some good form. And this game is playing on the black side against an Italian national, Lapiani Antonino. And Ben playing on the black side against e4 will usually always play a Sicilian like he does here. Knight f3, d6 was played, d4, c takes, knight f6, knight c3, a6. He entered his beloved Nachdorf. Now he's an expert in these lines, and yeah, he can play them in his sleep, I think. So Mr. Antonino went for g3, which is something you can play. It's not too common at this point. I think usually they start with h3 before they go into g3. But this is not a theory session. So he played g3. Ben replied with bishop g4, and the bishop tries to take advantage of these light squares that you weaken with g3. The knight dropped back, knight c6 was played. The bishop went to g2. Ben played e5, and this is a theme that you see in many Sicilians, where you go e5, and true, you're weakening this d6 point, but you get a lot of counterplay, especially with regards to that square d4 in the center. That kind of balances the fact that you weaken this pawn this badly. Bishop e3 was played. Ben played bishop e7. Both sides castled. Mr. Piana played h3 to kick away the bishop. Bishop dropped to h5. Then he played a3. Here he started to drift a little. I mean, his last 2 moves, h3 and a3, don't really give them the impression of someone who has a very logical plan, right? I mean, a3 doesn't really do all that much. The knight really isn't looking to come into b4 anyways. It doesn't have any targets there. So it's kind of just like a waiting move. But Ben exactly knows what he should be playing for in the structure. So he's very comfortable. He plays rook c8, and the idea is to play knight a5 and to bring the knight into this juicy square on c4, which is typical for many Sicilians. And then White plays rook c1. Again, another move that doesn't show a whole lot of ambition. I'm not sure what the point is. Maybe he wanted to move the knight away and play c4 himself. I think he eventually even did something like that. But it's way too slow, and it's behind the pawn that is still on the second rank. You should absolutely not be playing this way. So Ben continued with knight a5. Knight d5 was played. Now he wants to play c4, but Ben is too fast and he gets c4 in first. So White decides to trade on f6. Ben takes back, bishop f6. Now maybe the d6 pawn is a little bit weaker, and then he plays rook b1. And now you can tell the rook is not doing all that much. He played rook a to c1, now it's b1, and is serving a purely defensive purpose. So Black has at least solved his opening problems and is already looking to get better. So he took on e3, doubling the pawns there and leaving this pawn very weak. And then he followed up with queen b6 to attack that very pawn. So queen d3 was played by White to try and defend the pawn. And here Ben could have completely taken over the game, and I think was completely winning with a very specific move. It's a move that in general you look out when you play any of these structures with pawns like this out of Sicilian. Many times you get similar structures like this to out of Ruy Lopez when you're on the black side. And in general, you're looking to get opportunities to play this move d5. The move d5 kind of frees up your position. You no longer have a weak pawn, and in general, your pieces will get a lot more active. And here it has that strategic as well as a tactical point. The point being that after d5, the pawn is what you expect to take back. But then you respond with bishop g3 and you realize that you're just winning. This pawn is pinned by the queen and so cannot block with e4, which is what white would love to do. And as a result, the queen has to move away somewhere. There are simply no good squares. You're going to take on c2. The coordination here is wonderful. You're probably going to win this pawn on e3 as well. Then you're going to put rooks on the d5. It's completely winning for black actually. But Ben just missed this idea, so he played queen c6, looking to attack this pawn and also to add a bit more pressure to that one. Isn't a bad idea, but if you spot d5, of course, it was much better. White responded with rook b to c1 again. I think this rook has moved 3 times, and it's not even moved 20 yet. And Ben played bishop g6, attacking that pawn. White defended with knight d2. Then rook fd8, holding down this point, and now threatening to play d5 again. Now now it looks a bit more easier to play. However, white was just in time with the move c4. That was the point of the rook going to the c file, and clamps down the d5 square and stops you from pushing d5. Now these structures can be very uncomfortable to play on the black side, and in general it's difficult to find a plan against them. In general, you just kind of have to wait around. You can play for breaks with b5 and d5, sometimes even f5, but none of them is simple, and sometimes it takes a lot of preparation to play. But anyways, for the next few moves, you could tell that both sides kind of didn't have a concrete plan. So queen b6, queen b3, queen a5, queen c3, queen b6. One is begging for a queen exchange, the other is saying no. h4, queen c6, queen d3, bishop e7. And now Ben decided to bring the bishop back to e7, where it protects the weak point on d6, and then play f6 to defend that structure. So queen e2 was played, then Ben played f6. But this allowed this bishop to reroute itself and get some more activity here on d5. So maybe it wasn't a great plan. But bishop h2 was played. So the rook had to draw back to b8, then bishop e6 check, bishop f7, then bishop d5. So now white is again slightly better. The structure is really cramped for black. The bishops aren't doing all that much. This one can at best just exchange itself. And the dark square bishop especially is looking very, very sad. So Ben played queen e8, regrouping his pieces, heading towards the king side. Knight b1 by white. White wanted to reroute his knight here, maybe then take possession of the square on d5, which means as black, you have to take the bishop right now, because if the knight comes here, whenever you take the knight, is going to take back, and you definitely don't want such a great knight playing against this bad bishop in any sort of endgame. So he took the pawn now, and here I think white made a decisive inaccuracy. It's not exactly a mistake, but you can take your time and try and decide here. It's a critical moment. How do you take back this pawn as white? Which of these 2 pawns basically are you going to use to take back? And he decided to take back with the e pawn, which is kind of tempting, because for one thing, these pawns are doubled. So you want to undouble your pawns, and then your structure kind of looks like it's better. But I think practically speaking, that was a mistake that may have cost Mr. Antonino this game. The point is that when you take back with this pawn, well, for one thing, you increase the activity of your rook, but that's not even the whole point. The point is that you keep this pawn structure under control, because all these pawns are well controlled by your pawns. And the concept of pawn majorities comes into play here. On the king side, you can divide the board into 2, right? You can imagine a line that goes down, that divides these two files, and then realize that on the king side, you both have 4 pawns. And on the queen side, you both have 3 pawns. So there's that symmetry. But the second you break that symmetry, you should always be sure that it's in your favor. Now you're breaking the symmetry, and all your pawns are undoubled. Now you have 4 pawns on the queen side, and black has 3 as white, and black has 4 pawns on the king side, and white has 3. And so the possibility of majority and minority pawn attacks becomes something you need to consider. And that, combined with the fact that this king is already looking a bit airy, gave black a very decisive attack here. He started with queen g6, and that the point is very simple. He's going to play for a majority attack, and he's going to push these pawns down, because he has 4 pawns, you have 3, and his pawns can eventually break through your structure is the point. And white didn't react well, so he went king h2 to defend a g3 pawn, then f5 came, then queen f3, then rook f8, and you realize how quickly white's position will collapse here. Knight d2, the knight is now scurrying back to defend, but it's a bit too late already. e4 comes in, hits the queen. It stops this guy from ever moving, and then it puts all your pawns on light squares, which when you have a dark square bishop is what you want to do. Now the bishop that was tombed in just a few moves ago has all the leeway in the world to come and join the attack, and that proves decisive actually. So queen f2 was played, the bishop came to f6, rook c2, bishop came to e5, knight went to b3. That's not where the knight should be headed. The knight should be coming here to try and defend something, but maybe he also wanted to play for c5 and play for a majority attack of his own, but was way too late already. So queen g4 was played, king g2, and now you can try and pause and try and find the knockout punch that Ben found here. And the move is f4, crashing through with the pawns because he has more of them again. And I mean, there is no defense. So e pawn took, the rook took, so the queen had to sacrifice itself. The bishop took back, the rook took, and now you have a queen for a rook and a minor piece, a knight. After queen d1, you realize that the coordination between white pieces is, I mean, there are certain positions where you could play with this material imbalance, but here you don't even get close to working, especially because of your pieces and then the safety of your king. So white just crashes here. So he played rook c3 to try and defend everything. Rook f8 was played. These rooks were traded. The king tried to come up after b5. The pawn took. The structure was always going to collapse. The pawn fell on d5, and now you have connected passes in the center. Knight d4, queen e5, rook b3, d5, knight e2, queen h5. The rest is just clean up, so we'll kind of speed through it. And eventually then something fell. What fell? I think the knight fell first. Yeah, the knight had to give itself up for the pawn, and then all the pawns also fell. So yeah, that was a nice conversion from Ben. Yeah, and here white resigned because he is just going to take the pawn, take the rook, and then he queens first. So it was a very nice game. So Ben won the third round and had an excellent tournament, I must say. He won like 4 out of his first 5 games. And then he turned on the cruise control a little bit. I mean, he was, I think, like a full point ahead of the field at that point. And then he drew the next 3 games. And then he won the final game. So he went on beating the entire 9 rounds. Extremely impressive. And ended up placing first without too much difficulty, ensuring his qualification for the phase 2. So very impressive tournament. Very powerful display. Congratulations to him. Now, the second person you're going to focus on is good old Prince Apa. He's another young competitor, relatively new on the field, but extremely strong. He did qualify for the nationals last year. Although he was the bottom seed, he did very well with some high-profile wins, especially against the top-rated player in the country. And yeah, he was back to try and qualify again. Now, his route wasn't as smooth as Ben's. He lost a few games, one against Ben himself and against a couple others. And so in the next to last round, going into the final round, he was half a point away from the 5th position, and he needed to win his game to ensure his qualification. So that is the game you're going to look at. He was playing on the black side against, yet again, Mr. Antonino. I promise I'm not picking on him. I see now that his name is Antonio on this game, but on the other one is Antonino. I'm not sure which is correct. I'll take a look at it. So Mr. Piania started with 1e4. Prince responded with e5, knight f3, and he went for knight f6, a Petrov. So white replied with d4, knight takes e4. This is all fairly typical stuff. Bishop d3, d5, knight takes on e5, bishop d6, castles, and then knight d2. Black's play here was the first real deviation from kind of standard play. He responded with f5. It's a move. It's not typical, but it is a move. And the reason why it's not typical is that you kind of leave the e5 knight forever there, right? So you make this square now a full outpost. At this point, both knights have advanced protected pass pawns in opponent's territories on e4 and e5, but none of them is an outpost yet, because as black you can play f6 and as white you can play f3. But the second you play f5 as black, admittedly you want to support that knight, all right, but now you leave white with a full outpost, whereas you do not. White can at some point play f3 and sack your knight, and leave himself with a stronger knight in the position. So that was why it's a bit of a risky move. Let me put it like that. F5. Knight df3 was played by white. He wanted to support his knight. c6, solidifying the structure. c3, white responds the same way. Bishop e6, rook e1, rook e8. The queen came to b3, hitting this weak pawn on b7. Queen c7 defended. Then this knight came to g5. This was a bit strange. I guess you can understand. He wanted to exchange pieces, but I feel as white, you had a bit more room to play comfortably. Like you could continue making useful moves. And I'm not sure black had the same number of useful moves to make, especially since you have this idea of going f3 at some point, and he has to find another square for this knight to live on. But anyway, he went for the exchanges. Bishop took back. Black played h6, sacked the bishop back. Bishop went to d2. Then he went knight d7. And here white had another slightly critical point. He decided to play f4, making a similar decision as black did a few moves ago, to anchor in that outpost square on e5, but also give his opponent a symmetrical outpost square. I think bishop f4 here would have been significantly better. It does a similar job of protecting this guy without giving away that square. So f4 was played. Black responded with c5, trying to create some imbalances, create some counterplay. White played bishop b5, pinning this knight. And then c4, a very interesting move. And I think, I won't give you an exclam, but I think that was a very useful move. It breaks the symmetry, the move c4, and it introduces a lot more imbalance into the position. And I think it was the key to him gaining victory. So he's gaining space on the queen side, basically. I kind of spoiled the result just there, didn't I? Ignore what you just heard. He may or may not have won this game. So it introduces some imbalances here, in that black has more space on the queen side, and so it kind of introduces an element of time or race, because now black has a very simple plan of breaking through here on the queen side, and white needs to also do something in the center, probably where he's stronger for now, or on the king side to counterbalance this. So queen d1 was played, a6, the bishop went back to a4, b5. A bad decision, I must say, because of the fact that now it's become kind of like a race between black breaking through on the queen side and white doing something. You shouldn't give your opponent time, right? So bishop a5, allowing him to push more with b5 and lose more tempo with the bishop, is just a bad idea. You absolutely have to exchange over here, and I think the position there was still fairly balanced. But after allowing b5 to also come with tempo, now black was inching, I think was better here. The knight came to f6, looking at this outpost square. The queen came to f3, the knight went to e4. The bishop avoided capture, went to e3. Then he continued with a5. And the reason why the move c4, I was praising it earlier on, is that there are certain ideas in chess that you can't really defend against, if I may put it like that. Strong players really can sometimes, but it's tough. And one of those ideas is a pawn attack. So there are two types. You can have a minority or majority attack. We saw an example of majority attack in the previous game, and here we are going to see an example of a minority attack. And I mean, they are simple ideas, but they are so strong that in general you don't try to prevent them from happening, because black is going to push this pawn and black is going to get a weakness to attack here on the queen side. It's almost a certainty. So the way white plays against it is to try and create something else on another side of the board that will make the position imbalanced enough to counterbalance the fact that you are probably going to get some sort of weakness here on the queen side. And that is what you should be focusing on doing as white here. But he fails to do that. He plays rook b1 as if he's going to defend it, but you never manage to do that with that approach. So rook a b8 was played, preparing to play b4. The bishop finally took on e4, and I think taking with both pawns is probably fine, but prince took back with a d pawn, which I think was very nice. I'm not entirely sure why either is better than the other, but we won't waste too much time on it. The queen dropped back to e2. They are both probably fine, because I mean your idea is the same either way. You are going to play b4, which is exactly what he does now, and that's why I described this as a minority attack. So you can now split the board into two again, like we did, and realize that this time black has 4 pawns here on the queen side and white has 3. And you think having less pawns, you should have no right to attack on that side of the board, but that's exactly what the minority attack is. So you go and exchange those pawns, and you realize that eventually you're going to create some sort of weakness for white or the side with more pawns in those positions. So either you're going to take this pawn and he's going to have to take back, and that pawn on c5 will be weak, or you're going to push and have a weak pawn here on b2. And there's not really a good way to face it as white or as the opposing side. That's why in general it's good to also create your own counterplay somewhere. So he played rook to the d file. It's actually fairly strong, threatening to push, but then black just inhabits that square, blockades the center, and in general when you blockade the center, flank attacks tend to be more powerful. So now this minority attack on the queen side is looking very, very nice indeed. The queen tried to come into h5 to try and create something. Queen c8 was played with the idea of coming to e6 to neutralize this queen. Queen g6, queen e6 was played. Then the queen had to drop back. And again, you're wasting time, and you don't have time. So rook e7 was played. The queen dropped back to e2. The rook doubled on the b file. The queen tried to come to c2 to defend. And you don't try and defend these kinds of attacks. And the queen also put itself on a square where b3 became very powerful, because now it comes to the tempo and you don't have a3. So I mean, if the queen weren't here, whenever you try b3, you're going to be met with a3, closing down the queen side and stopping your attack there. But then queen c2 allows b3, and then you have to take. And then the rook takes back, and guess what? You're left with a very weak pawn here on the b file. Now that the minority attack has served this purpose, your point is to try and pile on all your pieces on that guy and win it. So the bishop came back to try and do a hedgehog type defense, but bishop a3 was actually a bit rushed, I think, because it doesn't come with any threats. White still has 3 defenders and you have 3 attackers, so you're actually not threatening to take it. At least not until you play a move like queen b6, and you can't play it as yet because the knight is here and fox pieces. So I think the slower a4 a3 may have been more accurate. I'm not entirely sure, but yeah, he went for bishop a3. h3 was played. The queen came to a6, I think, with the point of joining the attack here on b7, maybe, because he couldn't play queen b6 directly. The knight came to d7 anyways, attacking the rook. The rook came to b5, out of reach of the knight. And now white played a fairly desperate move. I'm not sure why. He gave up a pawn here on the c4 square. The bishop took, pawn took, he won a pawn, did black. And now he has to prove some counterplay as white. He plays queen f2, the rook comes back, and he doesn't really find anything. The fact that the bishop is here, undeveloped, hampering the coordination between his pieces, makes it very, very difficult for him to come up with any kind of counterplay. If, for example, you can imagine he had rooks doubled here on the d file, and he didn't, he stopped caring about defending that weak point and focused more on creating counterplay, you could imagine that he could have gotten something. But his approach here was not the right one. So the queen tripled down on the file. Rook d4 is now played, but it's a bit late. The bishop drew back to f7, rook d8, king h7. A bit of shuffling took place here that we are going to quickly go through. Okay, I think this is the next split. So rook d8 was played, hitting the bishop on c8. And then prince played this very tricky move, queen c7. Hidden within this move is a trap. It protects the bishop all right, but it also sets up a very nice move, which white missed. White just took the pawn on a4, thinking that was a blunder. You can pause the video here and try and figure out black to move and win. And prince had seen the very nice move e3, blocking the queen's defense of the f4 pawn, which could fall with check. And the queen cannot take because the queen is stuck defending this rook. So there are simply no good moves. He played queen d6, but the problem there is that the pawn queens. So queen d6, queen rook d6, just e2, and the rook cannot access this file because the bishop. So you have to play bishop d2, give up that pawn, and then you try and hold the back rank, but you just don't succeed. And so after rook b1, he played rook d8, a final last gasp attack. But then after bishop e6, he resigns. If he tries to attack this guy, you are now going to queen. The bishop will have to take, and you will be simply up a piece in a very simple endgame. So Ben managed to win the very last game to ensure his qualification. Was very, very timely. Just below him, at half a point below him, were I think 3 or 4 people who were tied. And so if he had even drawn this game, he would need to turn to tie breaks. And I think the tie breaks were actually in favor of him, but I'm not sure he could have known that before the round. So he would have approached it as a must-win game. So he did very well to win on demand like that, and also ensure his qualification in 5th place. So now we'll take a look at the list of players that qualified. So we had Bernard Anche, the top seed, coming in, playing excellently. We looked at one of his games and winning the tournament with 7 points out of 9. Congrats to him once again. Kandi Master, Lionel Edu, Clinton Fomevo, and David Eduyama tied for second with 6.5 points each. They all played very, very solid tournaments. They drew when they had to and they won when they had to. They really proved that they were the best of the field over there. And then we have Prince, who snuck his way in the final round. Very deserved, Vedli, I must say. And very nice performance from him as well. So another very important thing to note from this list is that the kids are coming. Oh my, the kids are coming. So in 7th place and 8th place with 5.5 points, tied just half a point behind the 6 points that was required to qualify, and even tied with David Ameku, who was the 3rd seed, another very strong player. You find two names, Richardson Mauli and Dave Chief Echampong. Dave is 9. He's actually 9 years old. Richardson is, I think, only 13. And these guys almost qualified to play the nationals. Like, it's actually insane. They are very strong. I mean, I wish we had time to go through some of their games. I'll probably try and do a video on a couple of them. I mean, they had some very nice scalps. I think they both beat Kandi Master Thompson. I mean, they're much strong for their age, and in just a year or two, you can imagine at least one of them will be challenging for the national title already. Like, it's scary to think of, but it's also very, very exciting, very impressive. Many congratulations to them both, as well as Arush Richardson and Neve. They all played very well with the juniors. It's a very exciting to look at all the progress being made in Ghana chess. I mean, it's small improvements, but it's definitely something. Which means the lineup for the phase 2, assuming there are no dropouts, will look like this, where we have the top 5 rated in the country joining the 5 who qualified here. The top 5 in the country, including FIDE Master Hasford, International Master Nkwanda, Kandi Master Jamna Mensah, myself, no master, and then Mr. Philip Ameku. Either him or Ajabon, depending on whether he decides to play. So yeah, it's looking like it will be a very, very tough tournament. I should go and start preparing. And yeah, I look forward to bringing you the games from that tournament after we play it next month. I think currently scheduled for the 26th of December. It's promising to be very interesting. Probably even stronger than the field we had last year. And yeah, we hope the results will be just as positive. Okay, bye. Thank you very much for tuning in. I hope you enjoyed it. Subscribe if you haven't, leave a comment, drop a like. Happy chessing, and I'll see you later.